Henry Caldwell had everything most people dreamed of. He lived in a mansion with tall white pillars at the entrance, polished floors that reflected his face, and windows so wide they seemed to pull the sky inside. Expensive cars waited in his garage, each one spotless, as if they had never touched a road. His dining table could seat 20 guests, but most nights it sat empty, except for Henry at the head, silently eating meals prepared by chefs who rarely saw him smile. To outsiders, he was the picture of success, a self-made millionaire, respected in business, feared in negotiations, and admired for his wealth. Yet, for those who dared to look closer, his life was not filled with joy but with silence. For decades, Henry had poured his soul into building his company. He started with nothing but a small loan and a sharp mind. People called him clever, others called him ruthless, but all agreed he knew how to turn ideas into profit. While others spent weekends with families or took vacations to rest, Henry was in boardrooms, signing contracts, chasing opportunities, and building connections. By the time he reached 60, his empire stretched across countries. He could buy islands if he wanted, donate millions in a single day, or live in any city in the world. But in exchange for his success, he had given away the one thing no amount of money could ever buy back, his health. At first, it was small. A little shortness of breath after long meetings. A cough that lingered longer than it should. Sleepless nights that became routine. He told himself he was just tired, just working too hard. But slowly, the truth came to the surface. Doctors diagnosed him with an illness that, if left untreated, would not forgive him. They explained his options, detailed the treatments available, and encouraged him to fight it early. Henry listened in silence, and when they finished, he simply shook his head. He did not want it. People around him were stunned. "Mr. Caldwell," they said gently, "you have the best resources in the world. You can afford the top specialists, the finest equipment, private care. There's no reason not to try." But Henry's answer never changed. He refused every offer, every treatment, every suggestion. His staff tried to reason with him. Old friends called to persuade him. Lawyers prepared papers just in case. But Henry closed the doors on all of them. In his own mind, the decision was final. To him, life had always been about control. He controlled his company, his money, his surroundings, and even the way people spoke to him. He believed that treatment would take away that control. Machines, tubes, endless hospital visits, it all sounded like surrender to him. He did not want to be seen as weak, lying helpless in a bed, relying on others. He would rather face the illness as it came, even if it meant leaving earlier than expected. Henry was not a cruel man, but he was not warm either. He had lived so long in the world of business deals and numbers that emotions felt like another language. His family, though still alive, had grown distant. His marriage had ended years ago, with his wife claiming she could no longer compete with his empire for his attention. His only son had moved abroad, tired of waiting for a father who was always too busy. In his mansion, surrounded by priceless art and crystal chandeliers, Henry often sat alone with only the ticking of a clock for company. When news of his illness reached the public, it made headlines. A millionaire refusing treatment was not just unusual, it was shocking. Some called him brave, others called him foolish. But Henry did not care what the world thought. He had never built his fortune by listening to the crowd. Still, behind his firm words and calm face, there was something he rarely admitted: fear. It was not death that frightened him. It was the thought of being remembered as a weak man, clinging to life through wires and medicine. He wanted to go with dignity, not desperation. That was why he kept refusing. To him, every doctor's advice sounded like a chain, every treatment like a prison. The staff in his mansion tiptoed around him, afraid to upset him. His assistants avoided bringing up hospitals. His chef placed food before him quietly, knowing Henry barely ate any more. Even his lawyers, usually sharp and confident, chose their words carefully when speaking of wills and inheritance. The mansion, once a place of pride, now felt like a giant waiting room, heavy with silence and worry. But Henry remained firm. No treatment, he told everyone who asked. I will not spend my last days chasing something I cannot keep. He was not angry when he said it. He was not shouting or bitter. He was simply decided, like a man closing a door and locking it from the inside. His doctors tried one last time. They sent their best specialist, hoping to change his mind. Henry listened politely, nodded here and there, but when the specialist finished, he said only, "Thank you for your effort. But my answer is the same." The specialist left, frustrated and helpless. In the evenings, Henry sat in his study, surrounded by shelves of books and files, looking out at the garden. He watched the flowers sway in the wind, the fountain splash gently, the sky change colors with the setting sun. He thought about the years he had spent chasing deals, flying across oceans, attending meetings that seemed so urgent then but felt so small now. Strangely, he did not regret his choices. He believed everything he had done was necessary to build his empire. But what he did regret, though he would not say it aloud, was how empty his victories felt without someone by his side to share them. And so, while the world expected him to fight his illness with the best medicine money could buy, Henry Caldwell chose the opposite. He decided he would not fight at all. To him, refusing treatment was not giving up, it was his final act of control in a life built on controlling everything. He believed he was ready. Ready to face the end on his own terms, without doctors, without machines, without hope of healing. What Henry did not know was that fate was already writing a different story. In the weeks to come, someone would walk into his life, a young doctor who saw through his walls, who would risk her career to save him. But for now, Henry sat in his grand, silent mansion, certain of one thing: he would not change his mind. Dr. Elena Morales was not like most doctors. She was young, yet already respected for her intelligence and gentle nature. Patients trusted her not only because she understood medicine but because she understood people. When she spoke, her voice carried calmness, as though she could take away half of the pain simply by listening. She had dark eyes that noticed details quickly, and a kindness in her face that reminded people of someone who actually cared. She was beautiful, yes, but not in the way magazines showed. Her beauty was warm, the kind that came from compassion rather than makeup or jewelry. Elena worked in a busy hospital where every day felt like a race against time. She often stayed long after her shifts ended, not because she was asked, but because she could not walk away from someone in need. Her colleagues admired her dedication, though some whispered that she cared too much, that one day her emotions might get in the way of her career. But Elena never listened to such talk. For her, medicine was not just a job. It was a calling, something she had promised herself since childhood when she had watched her own grandmother suffer without proper care. She wanted to be the kind of doctor who treated patients as people, not as cases on a chart. It was a late afternoon when she first heard about Henry Caldwell. She was finishing rounds when a senior nurse mentioned him in the break room. "That millionaire," the nurse said, shaking her head. "He's refusing everything. He doesn't even want basic care. Imagine having all that money and saying no to life." The room filled with quiet chatter, everyone sharing their opinions. Some thought he was being stubborn, others thought he was simply tired of fighting. Elena listened carefully, curious but silent. Something about the story stayed with her. A man with everything refusing the one thing everyone else begged for: time. The next morning, Elena was called into the director's office. She thought it was about her schedule, maybe an emergency case. But instead, the director looked at her thoughtfully and said, "Dr. Morales, we're assigning you to Mr. Caldwell's case." Elena blinked in surprise. She was not expecting it. The director explained that Henry had turned away almost every senior doctor in the hospital. He had refused treatment, refused discussions, refused visits. They hoped that maybe a different approach, a different face, might make some difference. At first, Elena hesitated. She had heard enough about Henry to know he was a difficult patient. "Why me?" she asked gently. The director gave a tired smile. "Because you listen. And right now, listening may be the only thing left." That evening, Elena walked into Henry Caldwell's private suite for the first time. The room was quiet, the curtains drawn halfway, letting in a soft golden light. Henry was sitting by the window in a large armchair, not in bed. He looked thinner than she expected, his face sharp and tired, his hands resting stiffly on the armrests. He turned his head when she entered, his eyes steady, as if measuring her. "Good evening, Mr. Caldwell," Elena said softly, her tone neither too formal nor too casual. "I'm Dr. Morales. I've been asked to check on you." Henry studied her for a long moment before answering. "Another doctor," he said with a faint sigh. "I thought I made myself clear." Elena walked closer, not with the heavy steps of authority but with the quiet confidence of someone who respected his space. "You did," she replied calmly. "And I'm not here to argue. I just want to know how you're feeling today." It was a simple question, but it caught Henry off guard. Most doctors asked him what treatment he would accept, what medication he would take, or why he was refusing care. But Elena asked only about his feelings, something few people had dared to touch. For a moment, Henry said nothing. Then he looked back at the window and murmured, "Tired?" Elena nodded gently. "That makes sense. You've been carrying a lot for a long time." Their first meeting was short. Elena did not push him, did not try to convince him, did not even bring up treatments. She only observed him, checked his vitals quietly, and asked small questions about his comfort. When she left, Henry did not stop her, but he also did not dismiss her. And that, for a man who had turned away everyone else, was already unusual. Over the next few days, Elena visited again. Each time she came, she carried the same calm presence. She talked to him about simple things: the weather outside, a book she had noticed on his shelf, a flower in the hospital garden. Henry listened, sometimes answering, sometimes only staring at the window. But he did not tell her to leave. Something about her presence was different. She did not look at him like a case to be solved or a problem to be managed. She looked at him as a man, not a millionaire, not a patient, just a man who was tired. Slowly, their conversations grew. One evening, Henry asked her why she had become a doctor. She told him about her grandmother, about the nights she had sat by her bedside wishing someone had listened more carefully. Henry nodded, his expression unreadable, but inside, something shifted. He realized this young woman was not there for his wealth or reputation. She was there because she believed every life deserved to be valued, even one that had chosen not to fight. Elena, on her side, began to notice the layers of Henry's silence. Behind his refusal, there was not just pride but loneliness. She saw it in the way he lingered at the window, watching families walking in the courtyard below. She noticed it in the untouched meals, the books that sat open but unread, the tiredness in his eyes. She did not tell him what to do, but she did something no one else had done. She sat with him in that silence, allowing it to exist without judgment. The nurses whispered that Dr. Morales was wasting her time, that Henry would never change. But Elena did not believe in wasted time. She believed in moments, even small ones, where trust could begin. For Henry, her visits became the only part of the day that felt different from the endless waiting. He never admitted it, but he began looking at the clock before she arrived, wondering if she would come on time. When she entered, the heavy air in the room seemed to lighten, even if just a little. He never told her to stay longer, but she often did, leaving only when the quiet between them felt complete. Henry had spent a lifetime surrounded by people who wanted something from him: deals, money, opportunities. Elena wanted nothing. And in that simple truth, he felt something he had not felt in years: trust. The night Henry's life nearly slipped away began quietly, like any other. He had been sitting by the window again, his favorite place in the room, staring out at the hospital courtyard below. The lamps outside glowed softly, and he watched the silhouettes of people moving: some nurses rushing to their duties, some visitors leaving with tired faces, some families walking together, holding hands. Henry sat still, his body weaker than it had been just a few days before. He told himself he was fine, but deep down, he knew his strength was fading faster than he had admitted. Dr. Elena Morales had just finished her rounds when she felt an odd pull to check on him, even though her shift had already ended. She usually respected boundaries, but with Henry, something in her heart never allowed her to leave without making sure he was all right. When she walked into his room that night, she found him paler than usual, his breathing shallow, his hands trembling slightly on the armrest of his chair. "Mr. Caldwell," she said gently, walking closer. "You don't look well. Are you in pain?" Henry tried to wave her off. "Just tired," he whispered, his voice weaker than usual. But as he spoke, a sudden sharp cough shook him, his chest tightening painfully. He clutched at the chair, gasping for air. Without hesitation, Elena rushed to his side. She placed her stethoscope against his chest and immediately realized his condition had worsened dangerously. His oxygen level was dropping fast. He was in crisis, and if nothing was done, he would not last through the night. Elena's heart raced. She knew Henry had refused treatment. She knew the hospital had strict rules about honoring patient wishes. But looking at him now, struggling for every breath, she could not stand by and watch him fade. She called for emergency equipment, her voice steady even though fear gripped her inside. "Stay with me, Mr. Caldwell," she urged, holding his hand firmly. "I'm not going anywhere." Henry's eyes opened slightly, filled with both confusion and resistance. "No, no treatment," he tried to say. But Elena shook her head. "I won't let you go like this. Not tonight." The nurses arrived with oxygen and monitors, hesitating as they remembered Henry's refusals. "Doctor," he said. One began, but Elena cut her off sharply, her eyes firm. "I know what he said. But if we don't act, he won't make it through this hour. Do it now." The nurses obeyed, trusting Elena's command. Oxygen was given, his vitals were checked, and medication was prepared to stabilize him. Elena herself worked tirelessly, guiding every step, refusing to leave his side. Her hands moved quickly but carefully, her face calm even though her heart pounded. Henry, half conscious, felt her presence more than the treatment itself. He felt the warmth of her hand holding his, the sound of her voice encouraging him not to give up, the determination in her eyes as she fought for him even against his wishes. For years, no one had fought for him like this: not his lawyers, not his assistants, not even his family. They all respected his decisions, his control, his power. But this young doctor, she was different. She was willing to risk everything to keep him alive. The minutes stretched painfully long, but slowly, Henry's breathing steadied. His color began to return, his body relaxing against the chair. The crisis passed, though he remained weak and exhausted. Elena did not let go of his hand until she was sure he was stable. When the room finally calmed, one of the senior nurses whispered, "Doctor, you may face questions for this." Elena knew what she meant. By overriding Henry's refusal, she had broken hospital rules. If Henry complained, her career could be in danger. But at that moment, Elena did not care. She looked at Henry, who was now resting quietly, and thought only one thing: At least he is still here. Hours later, when Henry woke again, the room was dim, and Elena was still there, sitting by his bed, her head resting lightly against the arm of the chair. She had not left, even though her shift had ended hours ago. She stirred when she noticed his eyes on her. "You should have let me go," Henry murmured weakly. His voice was soft, but it carried both frustration and confusion. Elena sat up straighter, her eyes meeting his. "I couldn't," she replied firmly. "Not when I knew you still had breath in you. Not when I knew you hadn't truly chosen this moment." Henry stared at her, his expression unreadable. For a long time, he had believed no one had the right to interfere with his choices. But now, lying there, alive because of her, he felt something he had not expected: gratitude, mixed with something even stronger, a strange sense of being cared for in a way he had not experienced in years. "You risked your career," he whispered slowly. "For me." Elena nodded without hesitation. "Your life is worth more than rules, Mr. Caldwell. If saving you costs me my job, then so be it." The words sank deep into Henry's heart. All his life, people had measured his worth in money, power, or influence. Yet this young doctor measured it only in humanity. She was willing to lose something precious, not for his wealth, not for fame, but simply because she believed his life mattered. For the first time, Henry did not feel like a patient refusing treatment or a millionaire making decisions. He felt like a man, fragile, human, seen. The morning after Henry's crisis, the hospital felt different. Word had spread quickly among the staff. Everyone knew that Dr. Elena Morales had gone against Mr. Caldwell's refusal and stepped in to save his life. Some admired her courage, whispering about how she had refused to let him die without a fight. Others frowned, worried that she had crossed a line that doctors were never supposed to cross. Elena, however, walked through the halls with quiet dignity. She knew questions would come, perhaps even punishment, but she did not regret what she had done. She had seen Henry's face in that moment between life and death. She had felt the strength of his hand holding hers, his eyes begging silently even when his words resisted. She had known, deep in her heart, that he was not truly ready to leave. When she entered Henry's room that morning, she expected him to be angry. She thought he might accuse her of betrayal, remind her that he had made his decision, or even demand that she never return. Instead, she found him awake, sitting in bed, staring at her with a strange mixture of wonder and confusion. "You're still here," he said quietly, almost like a child discovering something unexpected. "Of course," Elena replied gently. "I told you I wouldn't leave you alone." Henry nodded slowly, his eyes lowering to his hands. He was silent for a long moment before speaking again. "I don't understand you," he admitted. "I told you no. I told everyone no. And yet, you stayed. You fought. Why?" Elena pulled a chair closer and sat beside him. She looked at him not as a doctor speaking to a patient, but as one human being speaking to another. "Because, Mr. Caldwell, I don't believe you wanted to die. You were tired, yes. You were afraid, maybe. But I don't believe you were ready. Sometimes, people say no because they are protecting themselves. Sometimes they say no because they don't want to hope. But when I saw you last night, I knew there was still a part of you that wanted to live. I couldn't walk away from that." Henry swallowed hard, his throat tight. No one had spoken to him like this before. For years, people either agreed with him out of fear or argued with him out of pride. But this young woman had looked deeper. She had risked her career, not to prove him wrong, but to protect the part of him he had buried. Later that day, however, the storm began. Hospital administrators called Elena into a private office. Their faces were stern, their voices measured. They reminded her that patient rights were sacred, that refusal must be respected, that what she had done could be seen as a violation of trust. "You put the hospital in danger," one said sharply. "If Mr. Caldwell chooses to complain, this could lead to serious consequences." Elena sat straight, her voice calm but firm. "If I had stood back and done nothing, Mr. Caldwell would not be here today. I chose life. If you believe that deserves punishment, then I will accept it. But I will not apologize for saving him." The administrators exchanged uneasy glances. They were not used to such steady defiance, especially from someone so young. Meanwhile, Henry learned of the meeting from one of the nurses. When he heard that Elena might face suspension or worse, something stirred deep inside him. For so long, he had believed nothing mattered beyond his own decisions. But now, realizing that this woman's career might be damaged simply because she had chosen to fight for him, he felt a responsibility he had not felt in years. That evening, when Elena returned to check on him, Henry spoke before she could say anything. "They told me about the meeting," he said firmly. "They told me you may be punished." Elena tried to brush it aside. "Don't worry about me. I knew the risk." But Henry shook his head, his voice gaining strength. "No, I won't let them touch you. Not after what you did for me." For the first time, Elena saw in him the powerful man the world had described: the leader, the businessman, the man who commanded respect. His eyes burned with determination, not for himself, but for her. The very next day, Henry called the hospital board to his room. When they arrived, he looked each of them in the eye and said clearly, "Dr. Morales saved my life. If you punish her, you will answer to me personally. Do you understand?" There was silence in the room. No one dared challenge him. For years, Henry's voice had built empires, moved markets, and commanded boardrooms. Now, that same voice was protecting the one person who had stood against him. After they left, Elena looked at him, touched by his defense. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly. Henry gave a small smile, the kind that came from a place of sincerity rather than pride. "Yes, I did. Because for once, someone cared about me, not my money, not my power, not my reputation. You cared about me as a man. I owe you more than I can say." It was then that Henry began to confront the truth he had hidden from himself. His refusal of treatment had not been about bravery or dignity. It had been about fear: fear of suffering, fear of being seen as weak, fear of facing life without control. But now, because of Elena, he realized that true strength was not found in control. It was found in trust, in allowing someone else to stand by you, in letting yourself be saved. As days passed, Henry began speaking more openly with Elena. He told her about his past, about the long nights in boardrooms, the endless flights across countries, the deals that had brought him fortune but stolen his family. He spoke of his wife who had left, his son who had grown distant, the silence that filled his mansion when the world saw only luxury. For the first time, he admitted how lonely he had become. Elena listened with quiet respect, never judging, never rushing. She reminded him gently that loneliness did not have to be the end of his story. "You still have time," she said one evening as the sun painted the sky outside his window. "Time to heal, not just your body, but your heart." Henry looked at her, his eyes soft with something he could not name. "You really believe it's not too late?" "I do," Elena replied, her voice steady. "It's never too late if you're willing to try." That night, Henry lay awake long after she had gone. For the first time in years, he felt something stirring in him that he had almost forgotten: hope. It was fragile, uncertain, but it was real. And it had been planted not by medicine or wealth, but by the compassion of one woman who had refused to give up on him. Henry Caldwell had spent a lifetime believing his worth came from control and power. But now, as he faced his illness and the consequences of his choices, he began to see a different truth. Perhaps dignity was not in refusing help, but in accepting it. Perhaps the greatest act of strength was not saying no, but allowing someone to stand beside you in your weakness. And though the path ahead was unclear, one thing was certain: Henry Caldwell was no longer the man who had refused everything. He was a man beginning, at last, to open his heart to the possibility of life again. The silence between them stretched, but it was no longer heavy. It was filled with an unspoken connection, a bond formed in the middle of crisis. Henry finally whispered, almost to himself, maybe I was wrong." Elena leaned closer, her voice gentle but strong. "It's not too late to change your mind." Henry closed his eyes, the words echoing inside him. For so long, he had believed control was his only dignity. But tonight, this woman had shown him another kind of dignity, the dignity of being valued, of being worth fighting for, of not being abandoned to silence. As the night deepened, Henry drifted into a restless sleep, his hands still resting close to Elena's. She sat by him quietly, knowing the hardest battles were yet to come. The hospital would question her actions. Henry would have to face his fear of treatment. And both of them would stand against storms of doubt. But for now, one truth had already changed everything: Henry Caldwell had survived because Dr. Elena Morales had refused to let him go. And in his heart, though he had not admitted it yet, a new thought had begun to grow. Perhaps life, even with its struggles, still had something worth holding on to. The weeks that followed were different from anything Henry had imagined when he first entered the hospital. Instead of silence and refusal, there was conversation, care, and an unexpected sense of peace. With Elena by his side, he finally agreed to a treatment plan. It was not a complete cure, his illness had already gone too far for that, but it could give him time, precious time that he had once believed was worthless. The first step was the hardest. When the nurses brought the equipment and prepared the medications, Henry's old fears rose inside him. For years, he had told himself that accepting treatment was the same as surrendering, the same as being weak. His chest tightened as he watched the machines being rolled in. But then he looked at Elena. She was standing nearby, her expression calm but encouraging. She did not push him, she did not rush him, she simply held his gaze and nodded slightly, as if to say, "You're not alone anymore." That small gesture gave him courage. With a steady breath, Henry allowed the treatment to begin. It was not easy. There were moments of discomfort, moments when the side effects made him question if it was worth it. But every time doubt returned, Elena reminded him gently of why he had chosen this path: not to chase immortality, but to use the time he had for something meaningful. As the days passed, Henry began to feel stronger. He still had limits, of course, but the fog of constant exhaustion slowly lifted. He could walk short distances again. He could sit up longer without losing breath. He even managed to eat meals without feeling drained. For the first time in months, his body was cooperating, and with that came a surprising change in his spirit. Elena noticed it first in his eyes. They no longer carried only tiredness, they carried curiosity, even a spark of life. One afternoon, she found him sitting by the window again, but instead of staring blankly, he was watching a young family laughing in the courtyard below. "They remind me of when my son was little," Henry said softly. It was the first time he had spoken of his son without bitterness. Encouraged by Elena, Henry reached out to his family. It was not easy. Years of silence stood between them. But with Elena's steady support, he picked up the phone and called his son. The conversation was awkward at first, filled with pauses and unspoken pain. But slowly, words began to flow. Henry admitted his mistakes, his absence, his regret. To his surprise, his son did not hang up. Instead, he listened. And when the call ended, Henry felt something he had not felt in years: hope for reconciliation. That call was the beginning of healing, not just for Henry, but for his family as well. His son visited a week later, bringing Henry's young granddaughter with him. When Henry saw the child run into the room, her laughter bright and pure, tears filled his eyes. He had missed so much, but now, because of Elena's persistence, he had been given the chance to witness something beautiful. He bent down to hold the little girl's hand, his heart swelling with the tenderness he had thought was lost forever. But Henry's change did not stop with his family. He also began thinking about the world beyond his mansion and his wealth. Lying in the hospital bed, he realized that money had never truly satisfied him. He thought of the people who struggled daily without resources, people who never had the chance to see a doctor like Elena, people who could not afford treatments that he had once so easily refused. One evening, he spoke to Elena about it. "I don't want my fortune to be remembered as just numbers on paper," he said. "I want it to mean something. I want to leave behind more than buildings and contracts." Elena listened quietly, her eyes soft. "You still have time to make that choice," she said gently. And Henry did. With the help of his lawyers, he began setting up charitable foundations dedicated to healthcare access. He wanted others, especially those with little money, to receive the care he had once turned away. It became his mission, his way of giving meaning to the time he had left. The hospital staff began to notice the change in him. The man who once refused to speak to anyone now greeted nurses with polite words. He asked about their families, their lives. He thanked them for their work. Some were surprised, others moved, but all agreed Henry Caldwell was no longer the same man who had arrived refusing everything. Through it all, Elena remained by his side. She did not treat him like a hero for changing, nor did she remind him of his past stubbornness. She simply continued to care for him with the same compassion she had shown from the beginning. Henry, in return, grew deeply grateful for her presence. Sometimes he would simply sit in silence while she worked beside him, comforted by the knowledge that he was no longer alone. As weeks turned into months, Henry's condition remained fragile, but he was different. He no longer spoke of control as his only dignity. Instead, he spoke of connection, forgiveness, and purpose. He had accepted that his time was limited, but he no longer feared it. For the first time in his life, he felt at peace with who he was and what he could still do. One quiet evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in shades of gold and pink, Henry looked at Elena and said softly, "You gave me more than time. You gave me a reason to use it. Without you, I would have left this world in silence. Because of you, I am leaving with meaning." Elena smiled, her eyes glistening with emotion. "You chose to live, Henry. I only reminded you that you could." In the final months of his life, Henry accomplished things he had once thought impossible. He rebuilt his relationship with his son, he created a foundation that would help thousands, and he left behind not just wealth, but a legacy of compassion. And through it all, he remained grateful to the doctor who had risked everything to save him. When his time finally came, it was not marked by loneliness or despair. His family was by his side, holding his hands. Elena was there too, offering quiet comfort, reminding him that he was not facing the end alone. Henry Caldwell, the man who had once refused all treatment, closed his eyes with peace, knowing his last chapter had been rewritten not by wealth or power, but by love, trust, and the courage of a young doctor who refused to give up. And though Henry's life ended, his story did not. The foundation he built continued to serve, carrying his name not as a symbol of riches, but as a reminder of change, redemption, and hope. And for Elena, his memory lived on as proof that sometimes, the smallest acts of compassion could save not just a life, but a soul.